street-level shopping choices in Copenhagen, political strategy in Ottawa, and a corruption probe here in the GTA are all pointing at the same question. How does Canada navigate a rougher relationship with the United States? Later in the brief, one detail to watch is the next major checkpoint that could reset the Canada-US trade relationship. Toronto starts the week under cloud and cold, with a high around -5 degrees Celsius and a low near -18, and a chance of light snow. In the GTA, a major policing story is still unfolding after a York Regional Police corruption probe led to arrests of multiple Toronto officers. One of them, Constable Timothy Barnhart, has been denied bail and is due back in court March 19th. Police allege he passed confidential information to criminals in ways that helped enable targeted shootings, and that he took bribes connected to illegal cannabis dispensaries, alongside allegations tied to cocaine trafficking. The immediate impact for the public is trust and accountability. The downstream impact is the courts. Defense lawyers and prosecutors are already flagging that cases touching any implicated officers could be challenged, stayed, or reopened, depending on what evidence is affected. In provincial politics, Ontario Liberals have set their leadership vote for November 21. At the same time, the Scarborough Southwest by-election is shaping up as a high-profile contest after the sitting NDP MPP left to run federally as a Liberal. That local race matters because it's a real-world test of whether the Liberals can keep rebuilding in Toronto against the NDP, and it could also shape momentum heading into the leadership fight. And a quick look at baseball. Blue Jays pitchers and catchers report to spring training this week, with Toronto set to open camp Wednesday. The team spent heavily in the offseason, more than $300 million in new contracts, after last year's near miss, but they're also staring at a key replacement problem with Bo Bichette now in New York, and other departures taking production out of the lineup. The early spring question is whether the new pieces add up to a roster that's not just good on paper, but balanced across offense, defense, and late-inning pitching. Turning now to the bigger stakes, the Canada-US relationship, and what diversifying actually means in practice. Prime Minister Mark Carney has overhauled Canada's auto strategy, and the timing is as important as the policy. Ottawa has scrapped the EV sales mandate, the old targets that would have pushed new car sales to 60% electric by 2030 and 100% by 2035, and replaced it with tighter greenhouse gas and fuel efficiency standards for model years 2027 through 2032, plus a credit system for automakers. At the same time, purchase incentives are back, up to $5,000 for EVs and up to $2,500 for plug-in hybrids under $50,000. Here's the key point. This is being sold as a way to protect Canadian auto jobs and keep investment flowing, while still bending emissions down over time. But it also reflects the reality that Canada's auto supply chain is deeply exposed to U.S. political pressure. That pressure is explicit. President Donald Trump has threatened steep tariffs if Canada makes a deal with China, and Carney has responded by saying Canada has no intention of pursuing a free trade agreement with China, while pointing to Canada's notification obligations under CUSMA. Ottawa is also putting up to $3.1 billion on the table to help the sector diversify and attract investment, including in batteries. The risk here is policy whiplash, where automakers and consumers hesitate because they can't predict what rules will look like after the next election cycle or after the next round of U.S. trade threats. Climate experts are also questioning whether dropping the sales mandate makes it harder to hit net zero goals, and government officials have acknowledged they don't yet have a precise calculation of total carbon reductions under the new regime. Midway check-in. If you're trying to follow all this, keep one thing in mind. This isn't only a climate policy story. It's a trade and industrial strategy story, shaped by how uncertain the U.S. market has become for Canada. That theme, Canada reducing dependence on the U.S. while still trying to preserve the relationship, shows up in a new round of comments from major political figures on both sides of the border. Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper is arguing Canada needs to urgently reduce its economic reliance on the United States, warning that erratic leadership and hostile actions could create an existential challenge. Former Cabinet Minister Chrystia Freeland is making a related point from a different angle. If democracies feel forced to lean more on China, she says, Human rights and democratic values are more likely to get sidelined. On the U.S. side, former National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan is essentially urging Canada not to overcorrect, saying the post-Cold War era is over. But the Canada-U.S. relationship is still in both countries' interests and needs to be preserved through the turbulence. Canada's outgoing ambassador to the U.S., Kirsten Hillman, is also pointing to a more basic diagnosis. Both countries took each other for granted, and now the relationship is being relearned under pressure. And that brings us to the payoff teased earlier. The next major checkpoint is the upcoming CUSMA review. The Trump administration has been signaling it could push for separate bilateral deals, or even end the agreement. The closer that review gets, the more you can expect Canada's diversify but don't rupture debate to sharpen, because businesses will need clarity on whether cross-border access is stabilizing or shrinking. One more angle on this same story from overseas. In Denmark, app makers say there's been a surge of interest in tools designed to help shoppers identify and boycott American goods, after a flare-up in tensions over Trump's stated designs on Greenland. One app, Matometer, says it saw about 30,000 downloads in 3 days during the late January spike, and it uses image recognition to identify product origins and suggest European alternatives. It's not an economic earthquake by itself, but it's a useful signal of how consumer behavior can become part of diplomacy when relationships fray. Final things to watch next. First, in the Toronto police corruption case, the court timeline and whether any current prosecutions get delayed or challenged as evidence is reviewed. Second, in Ottawa, how quickly the auto strategy turns into concrete regulations that companies can plan around, and whether U.S. tariff threats escalate or cool. And third, the CUSMA review calendar, because that's where today's strain could translate into real, measurable changes for jobs, prices, and investment on both sides of the border. That's your Daily News Bite for Monday, February 9th.